Before I began content creation, one of the first questions that myself and Irk Pandas asked ourselves is how could we differentiate ourselves from others? Or what life or career experience could enhance our content? And for me, that was an easy question to answer, as I had just left a career in the firearms industry, and Escape from Tarkov is probably the most realistic game out there when it comes to firearms, ballistics, and so on. Recently, a few people on streams, YouTube comments, Discord, and so on have asked me to do a little story time and explain the who, what, where, and how about my time owning a gun shop. If you come to this channel strictly for Tarkov content, you may want to skip this video, as it's just about myself and my life before content creation. But if you do want to hear my story about the firearms business, as well as some of my personal life, sit back and enjoy the story. The year was around 2010, and I was in my very early 20s and working at the family business. At the time, I'd just come out of a very difficult part of my life. I struggled with fitting in and making friends through most of my childhood, and around the time I got into junior high, I finally found a group of people who would accept me, which unfortunately were the druggies and the losers. When I was young, I would do anything to seem cool and accepted, so I fell into a very self-destructive lifestyle, which also got me into jail on more than one occasion. Nothing super serious, but enough that I ended up dropping out of high school in my senior year and deciding that I would just go my own way, wherever that took me. Well, let's just say that it took me to a lot of very dark places. By 2010, I'd finally started to break off from these toxic groups of friends and decided that I would just work whatever job I could get, and that would just be the rest of my life. So for years, I did just that. I operated a forklift, unloaded trucks, cleaned bathrooms. I wasn't getting into trouble or hurting myself or others anymore, but I also lacked purpose and fulfillment. My destiny looked bleak and unremarkable. One day I was operating a forklift and my oldest brother waved me down. He was the vice president of the family company and someone that I very much looked up to. I was the sort of antithesis of what my brothers were, a kind of black sheep in the family. They had all sorts and manners of academic accolades and accomplishments, with my oldest brother having a PhD. I don't resent my brothers for this whatsoever, by the way. I'm just telling you this so that you know why I was driving a forklift and he was running a big company. He said, in more or less words, "Do you want to do this forever?" And I knew what he meant. Working long shifts of manual labor with no real opportunity to advance myself. I answered, well, no. And he invited me to his office where we discussed what opportunities I could possibly discover. He asked about my interests, and of course, the first thing I mentioned was guns. Some of my fondest memories as a kid was when my dad would bring a few of the shotguns up from the basement, lay them out on the floor with Grandpa's cleaning kits, and watch me as I cleaned the guns the way that he taught me. And the mechanics of firearms and the challenge of marksmanship was always alluring to me. Just days after turning 18, I went out and bought a rifle of my own, which was a Mosin Nagant M9130 that I got with its bayonet and ammunition bandolier for only $49. After much deliberation and thought, my brother suggested to me that I go and offer to intern for a small startup gun shop that was just around the corner and actually connected to the same building that I worked at. It was ran by a young couple, and they apparently were experiencing some severe growing pains and struggling to get their business off the ground. To ensure that I could make ends meet while working for them, my brother and dad offered me a modest salary while I did this. The goal would be to learn as much about the gun business as possible so that I could see if starting my own business would be viable. Not long after this discussion, I walked into the bunker for the first time. The place was small but relatively clean, and the industrial nature of the building seemed fitting for a gun shop somehow. I was greeted by an attractive woman in her late 30s or early 40s by the name of Shelley, and I explained my offer to them. I would work for her for free. In exchange, I only wanted to learn more about the gun business. She immediately agreed, and actually began to cry when I offered help. As I came to find out later, it was her husband's idea to open the gun shop, and he only recently got into the firearms hobby. Up until this point, she actually very much disliked guns, and also cried when he brought home his first gun, which was only about a year or so earlier. But over time, she warmed up to the idea, and she learned quite a lot about firearms. Unfortunately though, the entire gun shop project got kind of dumped on her. As her husband got less and less involved in the day-to-day operation, she was forced to run the shop by herself. They could not afford to hire anyone, as sales were few and far between. In addition to selling guns, they also had a Type 6 FFL, which is a license to manufacture ammunition. In the back room, there were about a half a dozen very high-end Dillon loading machines, 2 of which were automated. During my time there, I learned everything about making new ammunition as well as reloading spent casings. I also learned just about everything there is to know about ATF regulations, keeping records, and the basics of running a small business. Keep in mind that before this experience, I had zero experience running any kind of business. As I mastered more and more skills, Shelly came into the shop less and less. Before long, Shelly only stopped in once a week for just a few minutes, usually to pick up cash to deposit to the bank or things like that. I began to run the shop all by myself. I started to realize why this shop wasn't very successful. For some reason, the inventory they stocked didn't really make any sense. There wasn't much room for tons of different items, but most guns were used or very odd models. On the product shelves, they had an entire quarter of the store dedicated to spray paint camouflage kits, which of course nobody ever bought. And in the corner of the store, they had an airsoft shooting range. And I would cringe so hard when a customer would ask what that area was about. I would tell them it was just nothing and it was just something I did to entertain myself when it was slow. There was no way I was going to charge someone money to shoot an airsoft gun at some styrofoam. After a while, the mail started to pile up, and I noticed that many envelopes had ominous wording on them, such as final notice and things of that nature. One day I opened one up, and it was a notice that the electricity would be shut off soon, as the bill was now months overdue. I knew that the shop's days were numbered, and sure enough, Shelly came in one day to tell me that they were going to close shop and they were moving to another state to restart their lives. I took this information to my father, who's been an entrepreneur his whole life. I let him know that my internship was coming to a close and that I had learned about as much as I could about the gun business. He asked me a few simple questions, like did I know why they failed, or could I do better, etc. I answered in the affirmative, and my dad threw a curveball at me. He said, how about you make them an offer for all of their assets? The display cases, the loading machines, the cash registers, the store fixtures, everything. Bargain like you mean it, but in the end, try to get everything. I will loan you the money you need to start your own gun business. I was momentarily put into a state of shock. Lots of emotions ran through me at the time. I can't start a business. I don't know the first thing about running a business. I had zero self-confidence in my ability to accomplish what he was suggesting. What if it fails? What if I waste all that money? What if this? What if that? But he reassured me. It's okay if you fail, because as he explained to me, he has failed many times in his life. It's the only way to learn. I could have said no. I could have let my doubts and misgivings and my lack of confidence win, and said, there's no way I can do this. I'll just let everybody down. Let me start unloading trucks again. But I didn't. My father's faith in me inspired me to make something of myself. That for once in my life, I can show that I do have what it takes, and this time, I won't disappoint everybody. I bought all of the assets from the bunker, and then I spent 6 months setting up my LLC in business, getting banking going, figuring out how and where to source inventory. I got some great advice from my dad and other family members, but honestly the bulk of what I learned about setting up a business in the firearms industry, I learned through research online and reaching out to people who are already in the industry. Oh yeah, and my store was going to be in the exact same location as the bunker. Eventually, I named my gun shop the Armory. I had a lot of failures during this time. When I set up the shop for the first time, it looked horrible. I got some cheap shelving from Home Depot and it just didn't look professional. I tore the whole shop apart and began again. And it was an absolute nightmare finding a point of sale system that I could use. But eventually, the day finally came that I opened my doors for the first time. While I had about 3,000 square feet of space, I only dedicated less than 500 square feet to the actual storefront. This was because that even with the considerable investment my dad gave me, gun stuff is super expensive. And I didn't want to have a large store that looked sparsely stocked like the business before me. One thing I did right, however, was I chose a specific niche to focus on. Years previously, I saw an ad online for an AK-style rifle that was only $350. I immediately called all the gun shops in my area, asking if they had this rifle in stock. I was greeted with a, "What in tarnation do you want an AK-15 for, son? Don't you know that's a terrorist rifle? We don't stock that kind of stuff here, you out of your mind?" So when I opened my store, I decided to focus primarily on modern, military-style weapons only, and it was a near instant success. Within months, I had about 10 times the store traffic that the bunker had, but I was also a one-man operation, so to say that I was busy is a gross understatement. I essentially lived in that shop, staying there very late at night to finish up my ATF-required record keeping, as well as handle restocking and other administrative tasks. Almost exactly 1 calendar year after opening, Barack Obama was re-elected as president. This caused an absolutely massive spike in firearm sales, specifically the types of guns that I was now selling, like AR-15s. I was now becoming stretched thin. I was risking losing customers because I was trying to do paperwork, talk to new customers, work the cash register. My little shop was absolutely humming with activity, and I was the only one working. One day, it got to be too much, and a fellow I'd seen a few times in the shop that seemed knowledgeable was in the crowd of people in my tiny shop. He said, "You look like you need help." And I just nodded at him and said, "You want a job?" He nodded back, and I immediately put him to work. 1 month later, the Sandy Hook shooting happened. For those of you unaware, the firearms industry in the United States is a little weird. Whenever a politician or president that is openly anti-gun is elected into office, there's a spike in demand for guns. But also, when there's a very high-profile mass shooting, where the risk of assault weapons bans are very real, there's also a spike in sales, as people rush out to buy whatever they can before something gets banned. The Sandy Hook shooting caused the largest spike in gun sales in history. I cannot even begin to describe how busy I was. I hired people on the spot to help. I once had an employee's girlfriend and anyone else she could bring with her come to help bring more and more ammunition up from the back. After a while, we stopped even stocking shelves. We would just dump cases of ammunition on the display cases or lay guns up on the counter, still in their cardboard boxes, and people would just buy all of it. In my second year of business, I made $1.4 million in revenue. Over the next decade, small little booms like this would happen, especially whenever there was some kind of mass shooting. But it's this kind of stuff that contributed to me eventually leaving the gun industry. I always felt a little dirty whenever it happened. Sure, profits would go up, but those profits only happened because of a tragedy, where innocent people were massacred. I felt like I was profiting off the suffering of others. To help ease this feeling, I adopted an extremely strict business practice when it came to denying gun sales. Myself and all of my employees were instructed to never hesitate to deny a sale. If something seemed fishy or off, the employee just has to come to me and explain the situation, and I will deny the sale personally. It'll be my fault if the customer left angry, not theirs. And thankfully, during my 10 years in business, we had extremely little incidents of guns that we sold ending up in crimes. Over time, we expanded the tiny shop to 3 times its original size, and also completely remodeled the place, making it look a lot more visually pleasing. Over just a few years, we made a name for ourselves as the finest tactical rifle shop in the region. We also expanded our services and became factory certified Cerakote applicators. Over time, we shifted our focus to large commercial contracts, and eventually began to handle all the Cerakote work for Bravo Company Manufacturing, or BCM, including Cerakoting parts that went to active Special Forces operators. To promote my little shop, I also started a YouTube channel, which eventually got to around 80,000 subscribers, with a few of my videos having millions of views. But after several years, YouTube got much more strict on firearms content, and the threat of having the channel banned caused me to stop posting content after a while. But I do have all of my old videos saved. In the span of about 9.5 years, I sold over 20,000 firearms, and we serviced thousands more. I got to meet some incredible people. We also got to work closely with local law enforcement, including servicing local SWAT team machine guns. At one point, a group of kids tried to break into my gun shop late at night, and one was almost shot by the responding police officer. And I sold guns to some high-profile people, including a country music star. And we also Cerakoted rifles as promotional guns for large corporations. After about a decade in the industry, through years of booms and busts, Brittany and I had a serious discussion about our future. She had become a big part of my life, and a critical figure within the armory. I lacked organizational skills, and she really kept the place running. We questioned if we wanted to bet our entire future on this industry. Things were legal one day and illegal the next. We eventually decided that the risk was too great. We didn't want to wake up one day in our 40s or 50s and find out that we were forced into making new careers for ourselves because of new legislation that we had no control over. So we decided to close the business. I thought it would take about a year to clear out our considerable amount of inventory, but we actually sold off almost everything within about 3 months. And on the last day, in an empty and dark shop, I met with an ATF agent and signed all the paperwork that released my federal firearms licenses. It was definitely a bittersweet moment. I was confident that the decision I was making was smart, and I had so much fun and learned so much in those years. I have a nearly endless supply of crazy stories from that gun shop. And now I had some money in my pocket and basically nothing to do. I wasn't rich by any means, but I had finally achieved some kind of stability and self-confidence. I had accomplished something. I won't lie to you and pretend that I'm some kind of self-made man. I would not have been able to do what I did without the support of my family and my father. But in the end, they gave me the tools. But I actually managed to make something from it. and it'll be a source of personal pride until the day I die. I took several months off to decompress from the life of constant work, and then dabbled in a few e-commerce projects before finally turning to this, content creation. So here we are. I've been producing content with Irk Pandas for roughly a year now, and as you might have seen, we've been ramping up the amount of content we've been producing. I really hope to make it on the YouTube scene, but I'm confident it will work out. But if it doesn't, that's okay, because if there's one thing I learned during all of this, and if there's one thing that you can learn from my story, is that sometimes you need to step into the unknown. Sometimes you need to take risks and believe in your ability to do something that you think you can't accomplish. Because chances are, you can make it work. And once you do that, you'll stop being afraid of the unknown. You'll stop being afraid of major life changes or sudden eventualities. Anyways, that's pretty much the whole story. Since I've started content creation, I've wanted to tap into my experience with firearms wherever and whenever possible. But posting too much gun stuff to YouTube definitely has its drawbacks, as I outlined earlier. Demonetization and all of that is a very real concern. So I've had another idea instead. For those of you who wish to support this channel on Patreon, I wouldn't be opposed to setting up a Discord stage and live streaming some firearms content to our patrons. We could talk about my collection, clean guns, take them apart, or basically just chat about whatever interests you. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, stop by our Discord and let me know. This video is already long enough, so if you have any questions, by all means post them in the comments or join our Discord and ask me on there. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.